Good evening. Thank you for your attendance at our board meeting. This is our call board meeting for Thursday, June 10th, 2021. Um, it is 4:48, and we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Dr. Thomas, if you would conduct roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
Here.
Ms. Gallagher, Mrs. Davis,
Here.
Dr. Yeager, Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Dr. Anderson, Dr. Gant,
Here.
Attorney Hull,
Here.
Dr. Maddox.
Here.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So we do have a quorum. We will move forward with, and this is for our call board meeting agenda. The floor is open to amend or adopt the agenda.
I so move.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Davis, a second by Mr. Davis. Are there any questions or is it any further discussion? All right, all in favor of adopting the agenda we have before us, if you would show by raising your hands and saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, the same sign? Okay, that motion carries. And so item 3 is our strategic plan discussion. Dr. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am. We have our cabinet members here per a request from our board to receive more detailed information, most specifically about our performance measures and metrics used to assess our progress on our goals and objectives of the strategic plan. And so at this time, we're going to begin with our priority area number 1, which is student achievement. And Mr. Gaskins is prepared to do that. We're going to spend about 5 minutes on the just a review of those priority metrics, and then have about 10 minutes for questions for each of our cabinet members. We will not spend extensive time reviewing the goals and the objectives because we've gone over that several times, and I think our board members are pretty comfortable with those and fluent in what they are. So we're going to focus today mostly on those performance measures. Mr. Gaskins, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. So good evening, Board President, Dr. Gann, and board members. Feels a little different sitting on this side, but we'll make it work. So, of course, I am the owner of our strategic priority number 1, which is student achievement. Because of our length of time, I've added a hyperlink in the presentation, which is a 1-pager of our current data, so our baseline data for the progress indicators that we will review today. So we have 3 objectives for the student achievement goal. The first objective is our early childhood and elementary goal. Objective 2.1 would be our middle school goal, and then the third objective is our high school goal. So this goal increased the number of students who demonstrate progress as measured by student growth percentiles, also known as SGPs, on state and district ELA and math assessments. So the performance indicators that we will track is number 1, % of CCSD pre-K students entering kindergarten on level. Number 2, % of grades K through 3 students experiencing 1 or more years of growth on district ELA and math assessments and progress towards English proficiency. And number 3, % of grade 4 students experiencing 1 year or more academic growth on ELA, math, ELA assessments, as well as math assessments, and progress towards English language proficiency. So in this chart, because in the student achievement, the data is always lagging. On the left side, we have our progress indicators, which we will be able to update the board more frequently, at least 3 times a year. So we have what we call our Georgia Pre-K Work Sampling Online. So we'll be able to look at the progress of our pre-K students throughout the year as it leads to our performance measure. The second line is our diagnostic assessment. We use iReady to provide a diagnostic assessment for our students in grades K through 5. So this is an assessment that helps us learn more about our students' academic levels. And then the third is our benchmark assessment system, also known as BAS. This is a teacher-given formative assessment that assesses students' reading level. So those progress indicators we give multiple times throughout the year, and we'll be able to update the board either through a board presentation or a dashboard so the board can see our progress. Our performance measures are those assessments that are less frequent. So we have the Georgia Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills. That is a assessment. We just received those scores for the year just last week. So as you know, we would only be able to update the board on those final scores once per year. We have the Diagnostic Assessment for iReady. That's in both places because we give a beginning of the year, mid-year, and end of the year diagnostic assessment. The Georgia Milestone Assessment, those results usually come back finalized in October. And then we have our Access Assessment for English language learners online. Our second objective, at least 90% or more 8th grade students will be high school ready. So we're going to look at the percent of grade 6 through 8 students performing proficient or distinguished on ELA and math district and state assessments. We're going to look at the number of middle school students taking high school courses. I'm happy to announce all of our all of our 8th grade students will be taking high school physical science next year. We just finalized that yesterday, so we're excited about that. Number 3% of grade 3 students identified as high school ready. So looking at our 8th graders' literacy rate, their attendance, and then their ability to pass their fine arts classes, their world language classes, physical education and health classes, as well as their career connection classes. As you look at this chart, our progress indicators for our middle school goal, again, we will have our diagnostic assessment that we can use for our students in grades 6 through 8. We also have 2 interim assessments that we'll give throughout the year in ELA, math, science, and social studies to assess students' progress towards proficiency. We have progress reports that share with us students' grades before the end of the semester, course requests and fall and spring enrollment report as we look at course enrollment, and then we have the attendance dashboard. So those performance measures that are usually reported on once a year for middle school will be the Georgia Milestones. We'll have the Access Assessment for EL learners. We'll have course grades, course enrollment, and of course, their final student attendance. Our last objective will be to ensure that all high school seniors graduate college and career ready. So we're looking at the percent of 9th grade students earning 5 qualifying credits towards on-track graduation. Our second goal will be the percent of 10th grade students earning 11 qualifying credits towards on-track graduation. Dr. Thomas has talked to us a lot about graduation, and we know that we don't focus on graduation in 12th grade. We focus on graduation in 9th grade. And so that's why we will be paying very close attention to the number of credits that those 9th and 10th grade students earn. Number 3, the percent of subgroup participation in advanced placement and dual enrollment courses. And then number 4, which is the indicator for high school readiness or college and career readiness in high school, is their literacy rates, their student attendance, their accelerated enrollment, which includes AP classes and dual enrollment classes, their pathway completion, which includes students obtaining industry certification, and then their college and career readiness, which indicates students that go to college without having to take a remedial course, or those students that have a proficient score on the SAT or the ACT. So when we look at some of the progress indicators, some of the things that we'll look at along the way, just to make sure that our students are on track, we'll look at interim assessments. I apologize, I'll update that. We do have interim assessments at our high school level. We'll look at course requests and fall and spring enrollment reports, just to make sure that students are taking the courses they need for graduation. We have access to College Board reports, so we'll know how students are doing on the SAT and ACT. Our CTA e-director will be able to tell us about pathway completion. We have an attendance dashboard And of course, we'll have progress reports that help us know if our students are passing their courses. Those performance measures that we'll be able to report one time a year will be the Georgia milestone at the high school level, the access for EL learners, course enrollment in our AP and dual enrollment class. We have our SAT and ACT performance. We'll know the end of pathway assessment performance. Of course, we'll know the student attendance, and then we'll have the information for course grades and credit attainment for our 9th and 10th grade students. So again, on the first slide, we do have some baseline data. If you click on the hyperlink, it will show you the baseline data that we've been able to collect so far, which is a lot of data. And so I just encourage the board members to contact Dr. Thomas to schedule a time with me or James Barlament, who is our Director of Data and Research, and we can go through the one-pager with you to explain all of those data sets or answer any questions that you have related to the student achievement goal. So Dr. Thomas, I will turn it over to you for any questions from the board.
So if you all have questions, Mr. Gaskins is available now to, yes, Mr. Davis.
Oh, that's not going to stay on. One thing that out, when I'm just talking to people that are non-connected to public education at all, they always talk about soft skills. And it used to be that, in terms of college and career ready, that Athens Tech offered a work ready certification. And that was over a decade ago. Is there any objective measure that is offered students where they can be assessed in terms of the soft skills?
So our soft skills are embedded in the pathway courses that the students take. So for example, there are 3 courses in the pathway before students sit for industry certification. And a part of those 3 courses are the soft skills they need to be successful in that industry. We see it more in the hospitality pathway, but they're present in all of the pathways.
What about if it's an academic path? Because some of our pathways are academic, aren't they?
I would consider all pathways academic.
Then all would be under CTAE.
Right. So if they're not a CTAE, yes, they would not receive that intentional soft skill instruction. We try to make up for that in advisement. But I think there's probably some area for improvement as we think about soft skills in our advisement courses.
Okay, so one other question. So as far as you know, Athens Tech no longer has that work ready certification. It used to be, it was pushed by the state years ago.
I would have to check in and see.
Okay.
I'm not sure offhand.
I'm sorry, I'm aware there's a summer program that Marvin Nunnally is kicking off. And it continues in the fall, but it covers those certifications. Work ready.
Okay.
Just a clarifying question. Did you say that all of the 8th graders will be taking 9th grade science next year?
Yes. So we've worked on that for a couple of years. So our 8th grade science course and physical science are almost very similar. And what we've had in the past is that some students would elect to take the physical science and some would not. And they're not different. And so what we want to be able to do is provide that course to all of our students for course credit. We do have some structures in place that our middle school leaders are finalizing. If a student is not doing well in that physical science class, we don't want that grade to impact their GPA. So they will be able to move into an 8th grade course if needed. But we're going to support our kids, and hopefully 100% of all of our students will go into high school with at least 1 credit towards graduation.
That is amazing. Thank you.
So my question is this, and I'm looking for that. I don't know, maybe it's the goal itself. How different is this from what we're doing now?
How
different is, are the things that we're doing going forward under this strategic plan different from what's happening now?
So I think an opinion of one. I think that some of the data that we have always collected, that our community and sometimes our students are not aware of how important it is. And so, for example, I think the end of pathway assessment has been around for a while, and very few students take the end of pathway assessment because they take the class and they think that the class is enough, but they're not aware of the value of actually being industry certified. So, for example, our culinary arts pathway, those students would sit for the Safe Serve industry certification. And that certification, if you wanted to be a manager at Starbucks, would be the certification you would need to be the manager. So I think that the data that we're collecting is not new. I think that we have identified it as important is new, and then pushing students and families to explore some of the opportunities that are already available to them would be something that is new for our district.
So the progress of one grade level, as I recall back in the K through in the earlier grades, is that kind of standard that they want to complete assessment at one grade level every year, assuming they're on track?
Yes.
Okay, and so we're still pushing for that one grade every year. Do we have a sense of how close, how do we get to closing the gap, achievement gap with that type of strategy?
Yes, so I was able to share some information with Dr. Thomas, and this information will be in your board update this weekend. We were able to collect data, and not just for students that are progressing 1 year, but 1 or more years. So we have data for students that are making 1 year of progress, and then we have data for students that are making advanced progress, would be 2 or more years. In that data set that you will receive, it shows growth and it shows proficiency, and it shows it for each school. And then it also shows, I have data that actually shows the achievement gap at each school. So during our leadership retreat, we share that with principals. We, to identify if there is an achievement gap at their school. Dr. Thomas knows that we met with every principal this last week to discuss one-on-one with them and their teams related to how they are supporting students that are not progressing at their school with actual data. And I think we've always had data, but now in our conversations, we talked about individual students, those students that are not progressing, who are their teachers? Is this teacher being effective based on the data that we have? Because if you have a student that is behind, how are you strategically scheduling this student to have the most impactful teacher the next school year?
And is that a monitored progress that we're looking at?
Yes, ma'am.
That's different then, right?
It is.
Thank you.
You're
I need
welcome.
to see the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, it's gonna work. My question has to do with the first objective with the elementary school students, and I wondered how much of these assessments or indicators or measures are online based versus teacher evaluation based.
Great question. So the Georgia Work Sampling Online is a teacher observation assessment. So the teacher is actually watching the student perform the or demonstrate the skill, and then they're recording it online. The diagnostic assessment for iReady is online. The benchmark assessment system is a one-on-one assessment that the student sits with the teacher and takes. GKIS, again, is it's a blend of the teacher observing the student do a task or the student actually performing the task with manipulatives. And then the Georgia Milestones is, of course, an online assessment.
Right.
And then the Access assessment has speaking, listening, and viewing as a part of that assessment with some online component.
And so when we're looking at, thank you, when we're looking at whether or not we're meeting these objectives, so for example, the percent of grade K3 students experiencing 1 year or more growth on ELA and math assessments, are we looking at all of these things together, the teacher-based ones and the online or sort of state assessments?
So what we are doing is the data that we will collect will be the online assessments. It will be the diagnostic assessment and the milestone assessment. The conversation that I had with Dr. Thomas today was we actually looked at the benchmark assessment system, which is a one-on-one assessment, to see how closely those align. So we want some alignment. So even though we are using one assessment to determine if we're on track, we're using all of the assessments to triangulate that data to make sure that it's a correct predictor. And so the conversation that I had with principals, either this morning or yesterday, I can't remember what day it is, our benchmark assessment was a little lower than our online assessment. And because it was a little lower and there's some subjectivity in that assessment, we're going to provide additional training to our teachers to make sure that there's not a professional learning gap with administering that assessment to make sure that it's more aligned.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess my concern with the really young kids is the online assessments and just these sort of standardized assessments in general. And I know this year was very different, but I just heard a lot of things about iReady, especially with the really young kids and sort of the value of that versus the stress and trouble of having these tiny children do these assessments. And so again, I know that things will be different next year, but I just want to make sure that we're not relying on these types of online assessments of kids as the only measure of their progress.
I agree with that, and I will say that actually our kindergarten and first grade students, their performance is better on the online assessments, and that's something that we have to dig in around to see more. I think the most valuable assessments that we have at our K1 level, or of course kindergarten is GKids, and then for K1 and 2 it's our BAS assessment, which is that one-on-one assessment
With the teacher.
with the teacher.
Thank you.
With the, Mr. Gaskins, you mentioned all of our 8th grade students will be able to take physical science, right? Will it count? So that means it'll count for a high school credit, and the middle school teachers teaching that, they don't have to have like any type of additional certification to.
So we can waive certification, which
Okay.
we have, of course, worked on with our HR department.
Oh, okay.
We have a lot of our teachers already that have the certification.
Okay. But it'll count for those students as a high school.
It will.
Okay.
It will
perfect.
count for those students that elect to accept the credit. We don't want any student that may get a C in physical science or an F in physical science to have to accept that credit for high school if they don't think it will benefit their GPA.
Oh, okay. So they'll have that option. The student will. Okay.
Yeah, we still want them to take the course because there is a unit in physical science that is not in 8th grade science, that is an advanced math unit. And we believe that that unit will assist with math as well as science.
Mhm. Thank you.
And Mr. Gaskins, for those students who, those teachers who aren't currently certified, I'm assuming professional learning will be provided to strengthen their science instructional skills.
Yes.
To support that, right?
So our coordinator of science, she was very excited when we, informed her that that would happen. She's a former middle school and high school teacher and gifted teacher. So she's very positioned to do that.
Thank you. And Dr. Marsha Thomas has provided our timer and said that we have to move on in order to get to our next meeting time. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Next, we will have Mr. Lawrence Harris, who will present on our community engagement and strategic partnership work.
All righty. Well, good evening, everyone. I am presenting on our performance indicators for Strategic Priority 2, Community Collaboration, in which our goal is to engage families, community members, and civic organizations as active partners. So our first objective is to increase the opportunities for family and community engagement with student learning. So the 4 ways in which we plan to measure our work towards this objective. First will be the number of MOUs and strategic partnership agreements we keep on file. We have been doing a lot of work this past year to make sure that partnerships that we build with local community organizations, civic organizations, faith-based groups are documented and not simply gentlemen's agreements. So we want to make sure that we have that on file, so that way if there's turnover in the organization, whether it's through with CCSD or in that nonprofit or civic organization, we can continue to keep our partnership strong. But we also want to be able to measure the impact. So as we look at the alignment of our community organizations and partners, local businesses with our work, we want to be able to revisit those plans annually or biannually to say, where are we when meeting the needs of our students? So we want to measure the number of MOUs. MOUs will be more district level, strategic partnership agreements, school level, less complicated. So that way it doesn't have as much legal language. The number 2 will be the percent of students and parents that report feeling engaged on the annual parent and I should say and student health survey. As you all know, we do administer annual health survey, and so we want to measure and see how are we doing. Are parents and students saying they feel engaged in our school environment? I do have the current data that I guess I could have inserted. Right around 76.7 was our parent survey from this past year of families feeling engaged, and we really want to see that number closer in the 90s and higher. So what can we do to make sure our parents feel engaged? Students was right around the same amount, about 74%. And so we want that number to be in the 90s. We want our students and parents to say, I feel engaged in my school, I feel involved in what's going on. It's a lag measure. And so we don't administer that survey but one time a year. And so we have been thinking about maybe administering an additional survey throughout the school year to kind of get baseline data, but also to see what does that data look like before we wait until the end of the school year, because there's a lag measure. If we wait to the end of the school year, we can no longer impact it. So we need to find ways to measure it along the way. Number 3 will be the percent of students enrolled and participating in our district after school program offerings. So being enrolled is one step, but do you attend and are you participating is another. And so we want to make sure that all of our students who are signed up, parents who have registered their kids are actually attending, are engaging in the programs that are being offered at our sites. And so we'll be measuring that. Luckily, that number actually can be measured throughout the year. We can pull that data at any point throughout the year to see how many kids have signed up, how many kids are attending regularly. So we want to make sure we're keeping track of that number. And then the last one is the percent of parents attending parent-teacher conferences. We have a really high percentage of our parents attend. I'm really proud of our district, always above the 95% of our parents attend conferences annually. So we want to keep that number going. We want parents attending. This year, of course, we offer conferences online. We got some very positive feedback from some parents who said that actually worked really well for me. And so we want to make sure we're offering opportunities and options that work for our kids and for our families. So whether it's virtual, in person, hybrid, whatever works, but we want to make sure that our parents are attending and we keep that number going strong. So we don't want that number going down. Objective 2.2 is all around communications. So we do want to create and coordinate an effective communications process that fosters a collaborative work environment, work not just being within CCSD, but also external. And so our first measurement is actually based off of the different avenues by which we communicate, including social media, our website, YouTube, our intranet sites, which is used by staff, and our district newsletter. Those are just about 5 of the ways we're measuring. There is such thing as an engagement rate where you can combine all these metrics together to come up with a number. But for us, we're actually keeping it separate. So the dashboard that we'll be using will actually present each of these individually. So you can see who's accessing YouTube, who's using our website, who's using clicks, who's getting bounce back rates, as well as with our district newsletter, how many people read it. We also have En Menos de Minutos, which is our Spanish newsletter that goes out, and our YouTube channel, which is managed by our district translator. So he gives quick snippets, overviews of what's happening in CCSD in 30 seconds. And so we monitor how our Spanish-speaking families are getting information, which is tied to our last goal, which is the percent of our ELL families reporting positive experiences with our district language services. So we do know that we have a Spanish-speaking population here in Athens. We want to make sure that their families feel that they're being communicated with in ways that help them to understand. And it's not just Spanish. We actually have 12 languages kind of that exist amongst our school system, although some, maybe 1 or 2 families at some of our middle and elementary schools, including Vietnamese, Urdu, some other languages. So we just want to make sure that all of our families, if they don't speak English as a primary language, can report a positive experience. When they call a school, they have someone they can speak to. They can speak to an administrator, a teacher in a language that they understand. So we have come up with a feedback link that our parents will have. They'll get a nice little package we're planning on giving at the beginning of the year that they can put on their refrigerator, and they can always report back on how was your experience? Are there ways we could have made it better? Do you feel like you had everything you needed, so that we can do continuous improvement? And then our last objective is around school governance. So we want to maximize school governance and flexibility all around student achievement. That's the whole reason we are a charter system. So the first one is about the percent of LSGT grant funds allocated to the school, but also used by the school. We want to make sure that we're allotting funds that we receive from the state per FTE as being a charter system. But we also want to encourage our LSGTs to use those funds. So helping to create ideas for innovation, helping them to share best practices across the district, cross collaboration between our different schools. So that way each school knows what's going on across town at a school down the street, and then they can use those funds to impact the 90-day plan that they develop at the school level. So it's not just about giving them money, but how do we help encourage them to use the money in ways that impacts our student outcomes? And then number 2 is the percent of schools that beat the odds. This actually comes directly out of our charter system contract. Part of being a charter system is all around student achievement. And so all of our schools should be beating the odds. That's part of the reason the charter systems exist in Georgia, is that, and in theory, should be performing higher than the state average. More schools should be beating the odds because you're using the flexibility to get what you need at an individual school level. So we want to measure that. We want to make sure we can track how many of our schools are beating the odds, which is I guess I should have linked in the formula for beating the odds, and I can certainly do that, Dr. Thomas, and include that so the board knows how do we calculate that at an individual school level. And then the third is the percent of our LSGT members reporting effectiveness on governance self-assessments. We had an amazing resource through the GSBA because boards, so just as yourself, have a self-assessment. So we doctored up that self-assessment and made one for LSGTs. We did include other areas that, of course, are under LSGT purview. And we're going to be administering that annually or biannually to LSGTs, because that's going to help us define what training do our LSGT members need and which ones do they desire. So this past year we did LSGT University. We had well over 200 people attend. It was great. It was by Zoom. But some of the feedback was that for veteran members, they felt like they already knew some of the information, but there's other information that they wish they had known. And then for new members, they still had questions. And so the self-assessment, I think, will be a great way to understand where do each of our LSGTs feel they are as LSGT? How do they feel their meetings are being managed? Do they feel like it's an effective meeting? What ways can we provide additional training and support so that they're getting the most out of it? So all of LSGT members, of course, are volunteers. They don't get paid for their service, but they're given their time usually once a month, sometimes twice a month. Some schools meet a lot, but they're doing really good work. And so we want to measure that. We want to make sure we're providing support and training that they need. And so that self-assessment's created. It'll probably be administered in the next few weeks to our schools. And so that's how we'll measure that impact and then know what kind of training and support they need. So that actually concludes my 3. I don't have any other kind of fancy slides. I'm happy to have any questions, Dr. Thomas.
Questions for Mr. Harris?
I've got, yes, Mr. Harris. When we talk about the percentage of students who are enrolled or participating in after-school offerings, you're talking about within the school setting, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I have 2 questions around that. One is, in terms of students who are participating like in Athens tutorial or other programs, is there a vehicle to capture that? And then the second, talking about the quality of the after-school programming from school to school, is there a way of I know quality is kind of a hard thing to measure, but in terms of the offerings of the after-school programming, if each school has quality after-school programming. So how are those 2 subjects?
So I can answer the first question for sure. I think when it comes to our third-party providers and other partners, I think that actually probably get captured in the number 1, 2.1, because we're going to embed that into the MOUs. And as I presented on last week, as we develop the community school model, we'll want to be working with our community partners who offer programs, and we'll want to measure their impact. Not all programs are created equally, and so we want to make sure that they are aligned with our strategic plan on what we're working on. We want to provide our resources and support. I'm not sure we'll be able to measure their enrollments because that is their program. So, some programs may say all we can have is 10 kids. And so I think that's fine if that's what they're serving, but I don't know we have the mechanism to track their enrollment necessarily. I think that may have to be through conversation. I know in our MOUs and strategic partnership agreement, the template, we've asked how many kids do you serve, the demographics, what's your goal and mission, how's it aligned to our plan, our strategic plan. So that may be a way to capture it, but I don't know if we necessarily would track, or if I don't know if it's our responsibility to track their attendance, how many kids come and go. The second question, I don't know how to, like you said, quality is hard to measure. I think that could maybe be a survey to students and parents. I feel like we have fairly high quality after school programs. Of course, this year we weren't able to offer them in person. But I think that could also be some type of, that can be a quality survey. We could ask, how do you feel the program's going? Are there other programs that you wish we offered, or other areas you want to see? But I mean, that could be a survey we can get administered to students and parents. I'm not sure we currently do that or not.
Yeah, I think we're talking about like what I'm talking about is like I think 21st century. Where there would be some schools would have karate and dancing and have an assortment of activities, whereas another school may offer maybe homework help, or
You're asking if we have like is there a way to measure or have a comprehensive list of what's offered at each school? So I'm not sure, but I mean, we could probably work on getting a list of what's offered at each school through 21st century. I can certainly work on that.
And could it be posted on their website?
Can it be posted on the website? We can. We're working on revamping the website, so we can look at it. I think we have an after school program tab, but if it's program offerings, we could look into that.
I would like to see that too. And I think you can measure those, and again, because I guess the decisions to have these programs come from the schools themselves and the LSGTs, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so I think there should be some type of criteria so that we're doing apples to apples across all schools.
Got it.
Thank you.
Is there any other feedback and just any comments around what Mr. Davis and Ms. Davis would like to see? Is it general board consensus that would be helpful information?
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. I guess I was thinking when you were talking about the percent of students enrolled and participating in district after-school program offerings, I wasn't actually thinking about after-school programs. I thought you were talking about like when schools do nightly events or things like that. Is that also included in that, or is that something separate?
So that's separate. And actually,
Okay.
one of the measures was whether or not we should measure attendance at events, but that's part of our family engagement measurement. So not necessarily teased out in here, but yeah, that's part of our family
Okay.
engagement data.
And there is one other thing, if I could say, just kind of food for thought, and I know it may blend over into, academic achievement, but summer, there's always a gap in terms of, academic, social, emotional, a lot of times during the summer, and so somehow or the other, as we develop our partnerships and MOUs, looking at the gaps in the summertime and at least keep track of what's available.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Next, we have Dr. Watley with our Climate and Culture Strategic Priority 3.
Okay, there we go. All right, strategic priority 3, provide a welcoming environment and positive school and district culture for students, families, and employees. Objective 3.1, we will provide an environment in which students and staff feel safe, supported, and accepted. For number 1, increase positive classroom behaviors as measured by a decrease in the percentage of ISS and OSS consequences for all subgroups. We have an internal discipline dashboard which monitors this data for us, and so this is something that we can continuously look at throughout the year and report to the board on where we are in meeting those goals. Increase the percentage of students reporting feeling safe and supported at schools as indicated on the questions for the School Safety Index of the Georgia School Climate Survey. So as noted earlier, the Georgia School Climate Survey is a data point that would be lagging. However, internally, schools often administer their own climate survey, and they drill down in terms of what is needed for students so that it can prepare us for how we plan for going forward, so that by the time they get to taking this Georgia School Climate Survey, we would have already created a plan to reach some of those weak areas. And also increase percentage of staff reporting feeling safe and supported at schools as indicated on questions on school safety and the School Climate Index of the Georgia School Climate Survey. The same would apply here. I am scheduled this summer to meet with principals to talk to them around their results from previous years to see where there may be some strengths and weaknesses so that we can kind of plan ahead of before this administration comes out around increasing school safety for those teachers as well as those climate index scores. As of now, those scores, just for baseline data purposes, are roughly in the 70s to 80s when I look at the historical data, the trend data from past to present. And so it would be good if we can increase that to 90%. Percentage of CCSD schools trained in restorative practices to build positive schools and healthy relationships. I think that aligns with a lot of the work that's going on in student services, but also in Lawrence Harris's shop as it relates to community building. And the performance measures that we will be looking at is one, that internal dashboard, the discipline dashboard, the CCSD discipline dashboard, which houses all of this information as it relates to discipline in school, out of school suspensions, high infraction, intense infractions of students who have those most severe types of behaviors. We do monitor those things. Georgia School Climate Survey Safety Index, as mentioned earlier, for our students, and the Georgia School Climate Survey School Safety Index and School Climate Index for our staff. Objective 3.2, develop actions and processes to ensure equity is interwoven and integrated into all aspects of district operations. So now equity is a foundational pillar of all of the work we do. And so that is definitely, it's an attempt to embed that in all of the lenses of finances, human resources, community engagement, as well as academics. So percentage of CCSD staff trained in diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's one. And then number two is develop an equity dashboard to monitor certain things. And these are the elected items to monitor would be the achievement gap data, equity opportunities for our students in gifted classes, as well as and the one I'm thinking about right now is gifted. Discipline and disproportionality, human resources. You guys know that we rolled out this year the Equitable Hiring tool. And so that is a part of our strategic plan. And now people are using it, and it really helps to guide some of our decisions to make sure we're eliminating any types of bias, open up opportunities for all people that are applying for jobs. And then as well, culture and climate, which would be measured by that the indexes that's mentioned before. And so at this time, there is not a diversity training that we're doing right now in the district. That is something that we're going to have to, as a school board and as a cabinet, kind of discuss what we would look to do to serve. So we're not really doing that. I know in the previous administration, there was a diversity training that had happened, but we would love to pick that back up and kind of move forward with doing the training. One thing that is really clear after just looking and listening and talking to people is that we need to really have a universal language around what is diversity here, what is equity here. We all come from our different lenses and perspectives. And so just making sure that whoever is partnering with us in the future, that they are someone that can kind of guide us through that work so that we're all speaking the same language. Thank you. Any questions?
Will the dashboard be public? Will that be accessible to everyone?
Absolutely, yeah.
In the dashboard that you mentioned, I know like you had sent one in our board update, and I know that I think we've seen it before, so thank you for that. And it's pretty, I mean, it's a lot of things that you can really unpack. So it's pretty interesting. Like under that tab that says the K through 12 discipline, and when you talk about the internal discipline dashboard, is that this, or is it like a separate?
No, that's the same thing. It's the one that
Okay.
we have. And so you all have been shared, but it's one that we created. And so
Okay.
that's the one that we'll be monitoring.
Wonderful. And then the equity aspect, will that be a part of this dashboard, or is that something, I know like probably districts are in different places, but is that something that is also under the schools charts platform that you all have shared with us, like the dashboard, or will that be something different?
Are you talking about the
Like
equity dashboard that I referred to?
Yes.
That is something that was started prior to me coming here, but I think it was in moving in the right direction. And by that, I mean, when we're talking about equity, looking at it as a foundation, it's more than just the training part. It's how we look at finances. How do we look? And so we picked certain areas in each one of the divisions to kind of focus on as it relates to equity. So yes, that'll be a dashboard that will be something we will monitor.
Just saying we're just looking at race in certain areas, but how are we looking at that across all of our different departments?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. My learning style, is it possible maybe to have a link of, I know y'all send us like these dashboards and things like that you're referencing in different places in the email, but is it possible to have at the end of this presentation or within your specific ones, just a link, like, link to be able to go back to, so it's easier for me to go to this presentation and quickly find it rather than trying to search, because
I know.
my learning style.
I
I'm
got
just saying, thank you.
okay. So I'm not sure. I got you. I'll make sure it's embedded in the PowerPoint and also into this form that I'm looking at. I'm not sure if this was shared with you all. I linked it there, but I can cut it and paste it into here. So it's easily accessible. And then you're going to save it to your favorites, Dr. Maddox. Yes, Mr. Davis.
If you don't mind, Dr. Watley, to go back one slide.
Okay.
Okay, in terms of the equity dashboard, human resources, what does that entail?
So as it goes, and Dr. Blankenship will be able to speak to that when she comes up here. But one thing that we did with human resources is we created an equitable hiring tool. And I encourage people to kind of go through it and read it. It kind of helps us to guide our decisions to eliminate the bias that we may be having in placing, for example, where do we place and post our job announcements? How do we recruit? How do we hire? How do we retain? And what questions are we asking when we are asking people to be equity minded? What are the questions? So we give thought prompts around that, like sample questions for you. It's a guiding document, and good feedback has been received from it as it relates to people just shifting. It kind of keeps that bias in check, if that makes sense. Going through it with the team to make sure that we're trying to get the best candidates, but we're minimizing any type of bias or our own perceptions that may be impacting the hiring process. So that's one thing under HR, human resources.
In my training today on DEI, the data was provided that said people who are trained on implicit bias remember it for about 2 weeks, and then they're back to what we did before. So you have to be reminded implicit bias every time you go to do something, pretty much is what that was.
Absolutely. When it comes to bias, it's a part of who we are, and it doesn't mean a person is bad. It just means that we're a product of how we were raised, what we're exposed to, what we're not exposed to. And so if we have these instruments that can kind of help us stay in line and remove that, then that helps us to make a clear decision that's bias-free, hopefully. You're welcome.
Ms. Davis, did you have a question?
No, just a compliment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watley. Dr. Thomas is sound has gone off. She has gone off. Our next is strategic priority 4. Mr. Schooneman was ready. He was about to jump in front of you, Dr. Blankenship. He was ready. It's like, let's talk money. At this time, Dr. Blankenship is going to address human capital and development.
I have the pleasure to speak to you about strategic priority 4, which in my opinion is around our most important resource, which is our staff. So as you know, our goal is to recruit, develop, and retain effective teachers, leaders, and staff who meet the diverse needs of students. So the first objective in that goal is to implement a recruitment and selection plan that attracts highly qualified candidates of diverse backgrounds to our system. And the measures that we're looking at here are to increase the percentage of fully certified staff as measured by GAPSC guidelines. That's the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. Increase the percentage of teachers of diverse backgrounds hired into CCSD, and increase the percentage of teachers on track towards completing alternative certification. So right now, because of our charter system flexibility, we have waived certification, but we still hold that as an important piece that we look at. So while we've waived certification, we support those that we hire into teaching positions to gain certification. And so our goal is for all of our staff, as appropriate, to obtain certification. I do have some baseline data that I don't have in the PowerPoint that you have, the presentation that you have shared that we're displaying on the screen, but I will happily share I put it in a different version, so my apologies. But right now, the percentage of fully certified staff that we have is 78.8%. So we have about 21% of our staff that are working towards certification or are in a position such as a CTAE position that may not, we have always waived certification because they didn't need to hold that. So you might have someone who teaches welding or auto mechanics who you want that industry expertise, but they don't necessarily have to have that teacher certification. So that would account for some reason that we would be less than 100%, right? For hiring teachers of diverse backgrounds, our baseline data is from this year, and we have 19% of the staff that we hired this year, teaching staff that we hired for the 2021 school year, were from diverse backgrounds. We would look to increase that year over year. I would add that we are amongst one of the most diverse staffs in our RESA area, which is great, but we can always increase that because we want our staff to be as diverse as our student body is. And then for the last measure, our baseline data is 89.6%. So almost 90% of those who are working towards certification are on track to complete that certification. And there are a number of reasons why people wouldn't be on track. And I mentioned last week at the work session that one of those reasons might be a financial barrier to entering a TAP program or a graduate program. And so we are working, and I actually have something that will be in the board update this week to share with you about our plans for how to address that. So. For Objective 4.2, to provide opportunities for growth and advancement for all of our employees, we want to increase the number of current employees who transfer to positions of increased responsibility or to positions that provide growth opportunities, and that's for both certified and classified employees. Our baseline data there is right now, for this most current year, we had about 37% of employees transfer for our positions that we hired for, about 37% of those transferred into positions they were internal candidates who transferred into positions of increased responsibility or into a position that provided them a growth opportunity. And I want to thank Meredith Paget for helping me gather this data along with our HR specialists who work with hiring. The next measure would be to increase the percentage of staff reporting awareness of career development pathways as indicated on annual stay surveys. So 2 pieces here. One, we need to articulate career advancement pathways. So if you start as a building custodian, where can you go from there? You can go to a lead custodian, you can go to a custodial supervisor, and who knows, maybe you can go to the director of operations or even chief of district services. So there's an articulated path for every job category. That's not going to happen overnight, but that is something that we want to work towards. And as we do that, we want to make sure. So on the stay surveys that we plan to develop and implement this next year, we would include questions around their awareness of those opportunities. So this coming year will obviously be a baseline year for us, and then we'll plan to increase that awareness as we go forward. The third measurement would be to increase the percentage of staff reporting opportunities for growth and advancement provided as indicated on the annual stay surveys. So that might be a question around, are you aware of opportunities for growth and advancement? So that helps us know, are we advertising the opportunities to our internal staff and making them aware of them? And finally, for objective 4.3, we want to increase the retention rate of effective teachers, leaders, and support staff. So 3 measurements here. The first is to increase the percentage of staff remaining in the district over the next 3 years. Currently, we have a retention rate of 85%, and that is classified and certified staff combined. Okay, so we can look at it broken down into the different categories. But right now, the baseline data that was gathered prior to my arrival was 85% with those 2 categories combined. The second measurement is to increase the percentage of staff reporting they feel connected, supported, and important at their school, as indicated on the School Climate Index of the Georgia School Personnel Survey. And those are, it's a set of questions that are asked on that survey. And so we are currently in process of getting the most recent data available to use as our baseline data. So as soon as I have that, I'll share that with you. And then the third measure would be to increase the percentage of teachers reporting the opportunity to provide input on school matters that affect them on the Leader Climate Survey. This is a new survey that is to be implemented in this next school year. And it's just bringing back those Leader Climate Surveys that were initially given as a part of the Leader Keys assessment. And this can be valuable information for growth opportunities for our leaders. So it will help us and it'll inform us in how we can provide those professional learning and coaching opportunities to help our leaders develop a supportive climate at their school. Any questions?
When you reference diverse or diversity, what demographics or characteristics are we talking about? Is it race, is ethnicity, ability? Like, what are we talking about in terms of diversity?
I very much appreciate that question because I believe that diversity is much more than just race and ethnicity, although those are important characteristics of diversity. This measure does look at just race and ethnicity. But I would welcome the opportunity to explore how we could look at it on a much broader scale.
We even talked about gender in our younger grades. We don't have a lot of male teachers. around some of our younger students. And so seeing male teachers at the elementary level as much as you do in the middle and high schools is also an area that we talked about, seeing women teaching STEM classes. So trying to have a broad view of what that diversity looks like is important to us.
Right.
And we talked about that. I guess it was in your one-on-one when we
Mhm.
last met. Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Blankenship, there were some things that I guess I was hoping to see. I think they're implied, but in terms of specifics, one is, our program to promote, to provide opportunities and encouragement for folks to kind of grow your own teachers. I know it's implied there, but it's not teased out individually. And I don't know if you're developing data metrics that would measure that.
Mhm.
We also, and if I say a few things and then you can kind of address them as you choose. So that would be one specificity that I would be interested in. Another was what we talked about, earlier when we talked about the strategic plan in terms of doing that comprehensive study of salaries and maybe setting goals in terms of what we would like to see at the end of the year in the study. So those are two things that strike me that are not specifically measured.
Right. So while you don't see those on this particular presentation, one of our initiatives is, and I was trying to put up the actual strategic plan to have the initiatives there. So give me just a second.
There's one as you look for it that is under 4.2. I don't know if that's the one you're looking for. No, that's not the one. Well, under the performance measure, increase in the number of current employees who transfer to positions of increased responsibility or to positions that provide growth opportunities. That's one of the areas as we look at those who move from paraprofessional to teacher, those who move from teacher to instructional coach, or maybe from teacher to MTSS, from instructional coach to AP. So it looks at that entire growth trajectory as we are growing our own, looking at those who do move up. So that is one of the performance measure areas where that is captured. And then we even talk about the percentage of staff reporting opportunities for growth and advancement. But the bigger is seeing that number of current employees who move to those higher positions. And that is
Mhm.
under 4.2, and that's the first performance measure there.
Right. And you're going to see those specific things in our initiatives. So what we have here are the objectives and the performance measures, but our initiatives address those more specifically. So the third initiative under objective 4.1 is to recruit for and build out our paraprofessional to teacher pipeline, which we are looking at expanding to have more inclusive language to consider individuals who may be in other classified positions other than paraprofessionals to go into teaching. And so absolutely in our department plan, we would have measures, specific measures around that initiative as well. And then for the compensation, that is one of our initiatives under 4.3 to analyze and address compensation structures to ensure that we provide consistent competitive salaries for all employees. And then in our department plan, it'll more specifically outline how we're looking at doing that to provide a living wage.
I have a question. Okay, I know that we have the teacher, the youth, the students, teacher initiative preparation.
Teaching as a profession?
Yes.
Yes.
So is that included as part of a pipeline for us, or is that strictly in the academic area?
So it is in the academic area, but we, one of the things that Dr. Francis is working on is how we can bolster that and use it as a recruitment pipeline for us. Yes, that is very much a priority for us. And that would be in our department plan as well.
Dr. Anderson, I think you had a comment or a question as well.
It was more comment, just, I don't know if the 85% retention rate is, it seems like that's a good, I don't know what to compare it to. Is that average?
It's a B plus.
It's a, okay, it's a B. So we want it to be like 95.
I want it to be, 95, 97%,
Gotcha.
but that's, the state retention rate hovers in the mid to upper 80s. So
Okay.
we're pretty on par with the state.
Okay.
We have to remember too that measure includes both classified and the state's retention data only looks at certified staff.
Gotcha.
So I'd be happy to break out those comparisons for you.
Yeah, I would love to see the comparisons, but also I just kind of wanted to know if we're trying to increase that, does that make sense? It seemed like 85 was good to me, and I was like, why do we want to increase that? But that makes sense. Okay. So then my second question, and it's not a question, it's a comment. When you look at retention rates, if you break it out by race, is that me? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Okay. And so when if you do break it out by race, are there differentials in race and who stays and who doesn't stay? And if that's the case, would that be addressed in the initiatives in the strategic plan?
The short answer to that is yes. And okay. Yes, Dr. M. Thomas. Thank you.
I'm afraid to even talk. Mr. Schooneman is going to now go to number 5, which is financial and operational effectiveness.
Goal 5, manage and protect public funds and assets through efficient and effective use of available funds. And I've got the pleasure to kind of present and talk briefly about the first 2 initiatives. And after that, we'll finish it off with Dr. Thomas on 5.3, the third initiative. So objective 5.1, build and maintain an adequate cash reserve to cover unanticipated deficiencies in revenue or unanticipated expenditures. Just a fancy way of saying we want to have a safety net, a comfortable balance in our bank account in case something unforeseen happens. There are 2 initiatives that aren't listed here, but I will read the first one. The first initiative is to achieve a balanced budget annually. And when I say achieve a balanced budget annually, not only are we passing a balanced budget, but then also that balanced budget is a plan for the next year. Do we follow through and monitor our expenditures? Do we have those controls in place to keep our personnel level at what we budgeted? And basically, do we follow through with that approved budget? That's what I mean when I say achieve a balanced budget, not just passing the budget, but do we also follow through and spend less than we're authorized to? So as far as in terms of a baseline data, FY20, when you look at the overall amount of expenditures that were authorized, we spent 96.9% of it. So underneath the overall approved budget. FY21, I also anticipate that we're going to spend less than the overall approved budget. What it is yet, it's yet to come. So the second initiative that we have is to build and maintain a cash reserve equal or greater to 15% of the budgeted expenditures throughout the fiscal year. And the reason that I have this on there specifically is because of the payroll calendar shift that we're going to implement in July. If you recall, the amount of money that we're going to have in our bank account is going to decrease by roughly $10 million, and it's going to bring our fund balance or our safety net below that 15% benchmark. And so Now we really have some work to do in finance, bringing that up above 15% throughout all 12 months. So benchmark data, FY20, the fund balance to budget ratio was greater than 15% for 12 out of 12 months. We can measure this monthly. And in FY21 so far, out of the 10 months that I presented to you, we've been above that 15% benchmark for 10 out of 10 months. I do fully anticipate the first 2 to 3 months in FY22 for us to dip down below that 15% benchmark, probably around the 13% range. Before we move on to the next objective, does anyone have any questions over objective 5.1, the initiatives and the measurements? Good? Okay. 5.2, improve effectiveness of fiscal operations and resource allocation. The first initiative that we have under 5.2 is to ensure the financial resources and personnel are allocated equitably. So we're not only are we talking about allocations to schools based off of FTE counts that they can use for supplies or contracted services. We're also talking about how do we allocate our staffing levels to schools on an equitable basis. And under number 1, the way that we do that is through the ramp. It's the resource allocation method or plan. And this last budgeting season, we put together kind of a prototype of the ramp. There are some tweaking, I think, in just some of the formulas that we have to do and be comfortable with Dr. Thomas and other cabinet members before we fully implement this for the FY23 budget year. The way that we are going to measure it, right now we are a Title I district, meaning all of our schools are Title I schools. For FY22, we actually had 2 schools that would have otherwise not been Title I schools, but we received waivers for them, good for 1 year. So it's quite possible and likely that in FY23 that we will not be completely a Title I district. And as soon as you become not a Title I district and you've got schools that are not Title I schools, now GDOE requires us to have this ramp. They'll come in and they'll look at how we allocate our general fund dollars to make sure that we're equitably staffing our schools, we're equitably distributing and budgeting our dollars to be spent at the schools. And so right now, the state doesn't come in and test that. Likely in FY23, they will. If not, we'll be testing that data internally. We'll be looking at not only our staffing allocations, but what we've budgeted just to ensure that we've met the ramp for our own internal purposes, as well as if GDOE comes in and does test the ramp that we are meeting it. The second initiative that we have is to strengthen training and oversight of financial policies and procedures. The big initiative here, our quality basic education funding. So the money we get from the state, it's directly a result and driven by our student counts, our FTE counts, which are taken multiple times per year. And what we're looking at doing in business services is providing additional training and collaboration with the principals, the scheduling teams to make sure that our students are scheduled in a manner to maximize our QBE dollars, our QBE earnings. So the way to see if we're successful at that, to see if that initiative is successful, we're going to look at the gross earnings per FTE or the gross earnings per student. In FY21, it was $7,489. And so far for FY22, we don't have that calculated yet. Likely with this initiative, just because of the delay of the QBE, it's based off the prior year's FTE, we won't be able to see if this initiative is successful and an increase in that ratio until at least FY23, if not FY24. And Dr. Thomas, that brings me to the end of my 2 sections. And I know Dr. Thomas has the last one, but before we turn it over, does anybody have any questions for me? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schuneman. All right. Dr. M. Thomas? So do you get 15 minutes or do you get a third of his 15?
Now, you know, I'm the one that always has problems. Okay, so I have objective 5.3, provide and maintain safe and operationally responsive facilities and learning environments for all students and staff. The initiatives under this particular objective, number one, provide efficient operational services through the nutrition, transportation, technology, facilities for students and schools. Number two, address components of district safety audit to ensure that all campuses provide a secure learning and work environment. And then number three is develop comprehensive going green practices across all operations and departments. And under each of these departments, there are key performance indicators that we report out in these areas at different intervals. And so these are our 5 areas, the health inspections through our cafeteria. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one so you can see. So this is our baseline data. We have the health inspection data. Our current baseline would be about 99.5% for our cafeterias, which is pretty good. This health inspection is conducted twice a year. And the goal, the state's goal is 95% or higher rating. So they're doing pretty good. In terms of our technology department, we have, when you have technological issues, you would submit help desk tickets. And currently, 90% are resolved within a 3-day span. And that's how we collect this data monthly. The goal is to get to a 93% resolved within a 3-day span. In terms of our school buses and transportation, they have a goal of fleet service data, which is the ability or the rate at which all of the buses are ready to roll to pick up our students on a daily basis. We collect this data monthly, and the current data is 97.5%, and our goal is 98.5%. Monthly progress update on surveillance installations, which would go along with our security systems. If you look over, our goal is to have, right now we have 1,102 cameras in our schools, and our goal is to increase that amount to 1,402. And then we have some schools that still have half or somewhat of an analog platform. And so our goal is to move all schools to a digital camera system. We're currently at 47%, but our goal is for all schools to move towards that digital system. And then under the total of quality assurance inspections and ratings, that's our custodial department. It was a little difficult. We didn't have baseline data for this year because, as we know, what their goal would be to have so many inspections per month. Zone supervisors conduct so many inspections in schools a month. So we have 23 schools, and they have 9 inspections, a year, and 3 quarterly inspections. And so the goal is for them to get a 90% rating on their score. And so like I said, I didn't have any baseline data this year because school was closed for half the year. So they would not have been able to conduct, it was 2 things, the number of quality assurance checks that they needed to conduct in evaluating their employees, and then the percentage of that quality assurance rating. And this is how we evaluate district services. Are there any questions? I would have to say, being an interim chief of operations, it is a very effective and efficient team, and they really take a lot of pride in making sure that our students are safe, making sure they're transported, they're fed, our buildings are clean, and when they're not, we make sure we take care of any concerns that they have in regards to that.
I've got one, and if you said it, I apologize.
Oh, no problem.
have, you know, the big concern has been this past years in terms of exchanges.
Yes.
Did you mention that already?
Yes. So I did not mention that, but you all were gracious enough to approve of those air purifying systems, and we just received a large inventory of those, and we will spend this summer putting those into schools. So some have them and some don't, and I can attach that template in this, but I have a template of where we are enrolling it out in at different schools. So yes, that is in progress as we speak.
I mean,
Yes.
I think that would be, and that, does that also measure air exchanges or just units in classrooms?
So they were going to different schools and doing the carbon monoxide
Right,
checks, which
right.
were kind of telling them how that airflow was in different schools. So they are piloting those carbon monoxide checks to give them a better indicator. But the air purifying systems have some built-in mechanisms that can also let them know how the airflow is going. Because if it shuts down, it sends some sensor to our folks, and then they go over and take a look at it.
Okay, I just think that might be, if that was teased out into an indicator at some
Yes,
point, it would be,
yes.
I think, very useful to
I
us
agree.
in years to come.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you to all of our cabinet members for their presentations. I think this has covered all of our areas. Thank you all for your questions. I think we've jotted down feedback, and I think the next step I know would be with Dr. Dykeman and others to then look at, decide which of those metrics we want to focus on for evaluation purposes, but then we will use all of them to monitor our plan and to give you all quarterly or semester related updates.
All right, does that conclude the presentation?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
Okay. Yeah, so Dr. Dykeman will be in touch, or has been in touch, and we'll talk a little bit about, or at least mention that a little bit later, as far as like which of those outcome measures overlap or will be included with the evaluation. We will move forward. Oh, Ms. Davis?
I had just one question. I think it's a question. With the CARES funding, I know that we've had that breakout given to us on our financial reports. And I understand from several calls that I listened to, there will be more and more money coming down the pipe for education. So there is an expected one that I think I've also seen on the presentation. Are we looking at that as an inclusive part of our budget, or how are we looking at, again, challenging things that are in the district that we can address with that particular funding that's coming? I believe it was directed toward the underserved, and I understand that there are also some set-asides for that. Have we had any conversations about that with anyone to see how we might best utilize those funds?
We've had some of those conversations with the board, and the big thing that we still were waiting on was the hiring of that new federal funds person to assist with that. We have talked about some of the positions we've already hired are for that. We've looked at the trauma specialists, learning loss, community schools. All of those are under the current ARPA guidance that we have. We've talked about utilizing funds to support community agencies with their work. All of that, part of that we've done, the parts that were easier for us just to go ahead and begin spending with. But the majority of those funds, we are waiting until, and that individual should start in the very near future. I'm looking at Mr. Gaskins, but that was where we've talked about developing a process for individuals to do proposals, for us to have evaluations. Those proposals could come from community, they could come from schools, they could come from teachers, they could come from departments here. But we need to start with having someone to have oversight. We also discussed the evaluation component. And I don't know if you all recall, but we even talked about having someone to work with individuals in the community on how to create those proposals and how to conduct evaluations so that we can remove some of the equity issues that exist when we have people who are great with services but not necessarily are fluent in the process of how to access those funds and then monitor that effectiveness. So that's what I shared kind of over the last month and a half, 2 months. And that's where we still are, is getting that person. You all approved that position. It's now been posted. I don't know if we've started interviews. Okay, they have interviewed. So that's where we are. We just don't want to move haphazardly and rushed without having a structure for how we do that so that we can be accountable for those funds and try to ensure that they have some effectiveness.
Thank you so very
Mhm.
much for that.
Yes, ma'am.
Any additional questions? All right, we will move forward to item 4, which is adjournment for the call meeting.
So
I move
moved.
that we adjourn for the called meeting.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Davis made the motion for adjournment. Ms. Hull, seeing that there are no objections or hands raised, we will adjourn at 6:14. And we'll take about a 5, yeah, sure, maybe a 5 or 10 minute break. Is that okay? Because I know, yeah, okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. It's 6:14, almost 6:15. We'll start back at 6:25.
Thank you.